Hello everyone, welcome back. Okay, so we have a Neuvillette Rerun incoming, and the obvious answer to the big question is yes, you should get him. He is very, very strong. That much is for certain. But of course, we now finally have confirmation, although League of Joys already knew, that Mavuika is incoming in 5.3, right after the Neuvillette Rerun. So, the big question now is going to be whether or not you'll be able to afford both Neuvillette and Mavuika. Some people are going to be finding themselves in that tricky situation because they're right next to each other and you don't necessarily have Neuvillette. Now, this video will go into the current state of Mavuika as we understand it, without diving too hard into numbers and all that jazz. So we will be effectively going into Mavuika Kit Spoilers. So if you're not interested in that, then, you know, I will tell you when we start going into the spoilers. But before we do that, I will of course do the usual things that I normally talk about with rerun characters, just so that we're caught up to the current state of Neuvillette, for those who, I guess, aren't aware of what is the dealio with him. Because yes, he is very, very good. And he's also very easy to play and also very easy to build, because all you gotta do is just use your skill, use your burst, and then just start blasting fools with your charge attack. Just as easy as hitting the subscribe button. Now, there is someone in the House Yami Discord who's kind of cracking the shits when it comes to me doing these long-winded subscribe and bell-ringing shenanigans. So instead, Neuvillette's last rerun was in 4.5. Now, the funny thing about Neuvillette is you can essentially make a team with basically him plus, I don't know, any off-fielder, any buffer, any defensive character you wish. So we'll just list out all the useful non-on-field DPS characters that showed up since his last rerun. So the first ones are going to be Chiori and also Kachina, who came off round right before his last rerun, Chiori at least. So if you want to do some geo damage for whatever reason, there you go. Now, if you don't happen to have C1 Neuvillette or C1 Chiori, then someone's going to be losing out on some damage. Now, that being said though, we also have Kachina, who could potentially be slightly more useful, I guess, because she can actually run the scroll set, which could potentially mean some buffs for Neuvillette, so that's really, really good. Xilonen is, of course, going to be the next character who can be at least somehow useful. Now, of course, Xilonen can potentially be a really good hero if you want to play a Neuvillette and Furina team, but that's going to be a little bit scuffed because you're playing triple Hydro. So unless you know for a fact that there's enemy auras and or shields around, yeah, probably not a good idea. Xilonen also makes source water droplets, but for some reason she only makes 2 of them. Not entirely useful for Neuvillette. Unless you happen to have C4 or higher Neuvillette, in which case those 2 droplets might be unironically slightly meaningful in some meaningless capacity. But if you're going to go for high constellations on either of these 2 folks, I would actually recommend high constellation Xilonen instead. Not because high constellation Xilonen is necessarily stronger than high constellation Neuvillette. No, let's make this absolutely clear. It's because high constellation Xilonen is funnier. That's all that really matters at the end of the day. Now, we also have Emily, who is, of course, a great alternative to Nahida, specifically in forward Vape Neuvillette. Now, you do lose out on the EM share if you go for Emily, and you might not be able to maintain the Dendro aura. I'm not 100% sure about this. It can get a little bit finicky, but you can deal with multi-waves better, and you do have more Dendro damage coming out of Emily than you would with Nahida in a team like this. The next character who's really, really good for Neuvillette is, of course, Xilonen. I've done an entire video on Xilonen and Neuvillette, so if you're interested in me diving deep into that, go ahead. But TLDR, she's busted. She can also run the scroll set. That's it. And then, of course, we have Autodon. Now, for some reason, I still don't particularly understand Autodon, but from my understanding, he should be pretty decent. He's going to be one of those characters who's part of the Random Bullshit Go series of characters that you can just chuck on the Neuvillette team and have a good time. He does, as far as I can tell, do a pretty decent amount of damage, so there we go. Now, while we're talking about newer characters, I might as well address the elephant in the room as well, which is this whole discourse behind Neuvillette versus Mualani, because there are some people who think that Mualani, and this sentiment may grow louder next patch, power creeps Neuvillette. You may have heard that. Now, I actually did a video on power creep, but when it comes to specifically these 2, no. I still don't think that Mualani power creeps Neuvillette. Let me explain. Mualani does high serotonin damage. not as quickly, but it is very high serotonin damage. That much is for certain. We're talking about like hundreds and hundreds of thousands of damage, which is really, really nice. And she is a big forward vapor, which is really, really good, which is how you get those big heckin' numbers. But you can screw up your Morlani gameplay relatively easily. And I'm not just talking about your normal attack shenanigans, I'm also talking about your ults just going off into Narnia and hitting a wall instead. Morlani also doesn't have any self-sustain at all, and as of today, Morlani does not have that many insane supports yet. It's mainly just Xilonen at the present moment. Neuvillette, on the other hand, does do a lot of sustained damage. And it's still pretty high numbers. It might not be hundreds of thousands, but it's still high tens of thousands. And that's actually really, really nice. Plus, he has a lot of self-sustain. Plus, he has Furina. So there we go. The reality is, the Morlani team and the Neuvillette team, they don't even really share the same characters, with the possible exception of she is her Xilonen, but that's Xilonen who's busted, like I just mentioned, right? So either way, even if they were going to, you know, share some characters here and there are alternatives in Neuvillette teams that I'm about to discuss.
Yoo-hoo! Time to shine! Hear the echoes of the valley. Clouds high, the birds call.
Silence! The times beckon.
So the two teams that I play with Neuvillette, aside from Random Bullshit Go, is of course the Neuvillette team and Forward Vape Neuvillette. The Neuvillette team was of course Omega buffed with Xilonen's release. Not that much that needs to be said. It's arguably one of the strongest teams out there in any Spiral Abyss where you can do Hydro damage and pop off. The Neuvillette team tends to be one of the most popular ones there is. Now, of course, you can have some alternatives in the Neuvillette team. With Xilonen, you can replace her with Zhongli or Kachina, or just go Random Bullshit Go. With Kaz, you could replace her with someone like Sucrose, or just Random Bullshit Go. With Furina, you could potentially replace her with someone like Mona, Tortellini, or just Random Bullshit Go. So there we go. Or you could potentially use someone like Layla, who actually works in the Neuvillette team as well. Now, Forward Vape Neuvillette is also very, very strong, but I don't play it nearly as much as the Neuvillette team. I've talked about Forward Vape Neuvillette in the past. There was a brief moment where it was somehow the CN meta, so that's kind of hilarious. Now, of course, these days, if you want to play Forward Vape Neuvillette, you're probably better off playing Morlani instead for this kind of Forward Vape gameplay. But Neuvillette is still pretty good regardless, right? He's a pretty solid alternative anyway, so there we go. For team alternatives, if you want to swap out Layla, you could potentially run C6 Diona. Actually, why do I never do that? That's odd. That's actually a really good idea. What am I doing? Or Rosaria. That works too. Now, there's a reason why Cryo characters are particularly goated in a team like this, and that's because Cryo off-fielders mean you don't suffer second rotation memes. Because Cryo and Dendro can coexist. Cryo doesn't react with Dendro, and that's actually a good thing. So you will inevitably get your 3 Draconic stacks. You might not get it right from the jump, but you will get your 3 Draconic stacks. This is not the case if you were to bring Xilonen or Zhongli or Kaz. Because if your Dendro aura, for example, is way too strong, you're never going to get an underlying Hydro aura to get that reaction. So having your Cryo aura being something that coexists is really, really good. Now, that being said, you can still go Random Bullshit Go. There's also an upcoming character that I'll talk about a little bit later on, who's also potentially going to be really, really good for Forward Vape Neuvillette, and I guess Morlani. Maybe not Morlani, I don't know. Now, when it comes to replacing Nahida, like I mentioned, we have Emily, so that's really, really good. Or I guess you could ironically go for full ER Kinich if that's something you're remotely interested in doing. Otherwise, you should be able to get away with DMC if you're skillful enough, or you could potentially go for Yao Yao, Baiju. Yeah, they're fine. They're not as good, obviously, as Nahida for her overwhelming Dendro app, but yeah, they're still pretty good. And finally, we have the higher, your Pyro option, right? You're going to need some Pyro if you want to do Forward Vape Neuvillettes, right? Now, obviously, the most obvious alternative is 3000 ER Xiangling. I don't think I need to mention what's wrong with 3000 ER Xiangling. The other alternative, of course, is Xinyan. Now, Xinyan is good, but you do need to hug enemies, which is kind of why I prefer playing Xinyan with someone like Morlani as opposed to someone like Neuvillette. I like Neuvillette's range. I'd like to keep Neuvillette's range without gimping it, right? There is, of course, going to be an upcoming character that I'll go through after everything else as well. Look, I do personally find Neuvillette to be a lot of fun. That's why I play him a lot. And it's not just because he's strong. I actually do think he's quite a lot of fun to play. Yeah, his gameplay is not the most, I guess, riveting, like, challenging gameplay on the planet, but it's just funny. And I always have a good time when I play him. I don't play him as much as maybe Neuvillette mains, but I still play him quite a fair bit.
Settle down. Let the mighty be humble.
Look alive! Ha!
Has anything changed with Neuvillette's builds? Kinda, but not really. So when it comes to his weapons, there is of course a new weapon, which is the event weapon, Ash-Graven Drinking Horn. This one's actually a meme weapon. It does work really well on Neuvillette because it's an HP substat, but it's mainly that passive that just, for some reason, makes it hit like a freight train on maglev tracks. I don't know how this happened, but it is what it is, right? So there we go. Otherwise, we also have the Natlan craftable, but it's a stat stick because the passive doesn't work on Neuvillette. Unless you're playing normal attack Neuvillette, you're not, so it's not going to happen, right? And that's the similar case with Morlani's signature weapon as well. Yeah. So aside from that, we're going to stick with the usual suspects of Tome, Sack Jade, and Proto Amber. That's pretty much the way to go. Now, for the record, I have R5 Sack Jade. That's all the background footage is using. So as you can probably see, I'm doing really, really well. So there's no reason for me to get Tome of the Eternal Flow. If you're a Battle Pass player, you'll be fine. For Neuvillette's artifacts, nothing has changed. It's still Mother Shosei, HP, Hydro Crit. If you're playing with Furina, there's a good to fair chance that HP cups might be better. And if you're going for C2 and or Tome, there is a good to fair chance that HP hats are going to be better as well. Now, for Neuvillette's constellations, I highly recommend not going for a single one of them. And it's not because they're weak or useless. Far from it, in fact. It's because of three very specific reasons. Number one, like I said, I have C0 Sack Jade Neuvillette, and he's already plenty strong. Number two, Mavuika is coming. Number three, there's rumors that the 5.3 banners, in terms of their 5 stars, as a whole, are going to be an absolute disaster for anyone who doesn't have these characters already and don't want to spend, you know, a mortgage on them. So if you want to save yourself from that, you may want to, you know, steer clear of these constellations. Do not go for Neuvillette's constellations. But just so we're clear about what I'm recommending you don't get, let's go through them. C1 is, of course, an extra Crotonic stack for his passive, plus an interruption resistance while you're blasting, specifically while you're blasting, of course. Honestly, part of what makes Neuvillette interesting is finding ways to still get 3 stacks of his passive without C1. In the Neuvillette team, for example, we have ways of doing it, you just got to think outside the box. Or go up against enemies that have auras. C2 is almost always plus 42% crit damage, which is kind of stupid. Only if you're playing, I guess, triple Hydro Neuvillette will you maybe not get 42% crit damage from it. C3 is plus 3 charge attack levels. C5 is plus 3 ult levels. Very useful. C4 is an extra source water droplet every 4 seconds, which I believe without C6 basically comes out to plus 1 source water droplet whenever you use a full charge attack. So like when you actually blast for the entire duration, you should be getting 1 source water droplet every single time. So that's a thing that can be useful, I guess. C6 is never stopping on the charge attacks, which is what makes C4 really, really nice. And you also get 2 extra attacks for some reason. Completely and utterly unnecessary, especially when really, really cool characters are allegedly coming up.
Sharing my knowledge.
Okay, at this point, we're about to step away from things we already know and step into the realm of spoilers. So if you do not want to hear what Mavuika or Citlali's kits are all about, especially with regards to Neuvillette, thanks for watching. Let me just think about all of this in the comments below. Are you going to get Neuvillette anyway, knowing full well that Mavuika and Citlali are incoming? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe as well, and I'll catch you next time. Alright, you have been warned. Let's get into it. The funny thing about both Mavuika and Citlali is that they're going to be potentially huge buffs for Vape Neuvillette. And by extension, the Xilonen team. You could potentially also use them in the Neuvillette team as well, but only one of them. You probably don't want to be using both of them in the Neuvillette. Actually, maybe you can. Now, without diving into, damage numbers and all that jazz, this is what we know. Mavuika is going to have off-build Pyro app. Now, as far as I understand, it's once every 2 seconds for a hit. It has no ICD, and it's 1 unit. So what that actually means is it's half as much Pyro app as Xilonen. But no ER required, as opposed to Xialonen's aforementioned 3000 ER, and you don't need to hug enemies in order to make it work. So offensively, what we're actually dealing with is the higher power creep. But with the higher, you get that defensive utility. You're not going to get any defensive utility with Mavuika. We also have Mavuika's motorcycle attacks. They're probably not going to be all that useful in a Neuvillette team, because in general, double on-fielders get finicky. But that being said, there have been occasions when Neuvillette skill and burst are on cooldown and you don't want to be doing raw charge attack charging up. So at that point, I guess if you find yourselves with that little bit of downtime, you might as well ult with Mavuika. So that's kind of nice. Now, when it comes to Citlali, the idea with Citlali is that she's a cryo character who, for some reason, can res shred Pyro and Hydro. And not cryo. I don't know how that makes any sense, but either way, that's inexplicably useful for Vape Neuvillette, because you can therefore shred both, let's say, Mavuika's Pyro damage by just melting, and Neuvillette's Hydro damage by landing a freeze. You don't even have to freeze the enemy. You just have to actually do the reaction. Now, it's, at the present moment, 20% res shred, which is the same as Zhongli. But what Zhongli suffers from is second rotation beams. Citlali, being cryo, doesn't suffer from second rotation beams in forward Vape Neuvillette teams. Again, because cryo and Dendra can coexist. I think Citlali is probably going to be able to do an absolutely absurd amount of damage anyway, but who knows, right? That's number shenanigans, but if you have a look at that A4 passive, at the present moment, the way it's written is kind of insane. Maybe. I don't know. We'll just have to see. Of course, both Mavuika and Citlali can use the scroll set. Now, you probably don't need to run them both on the scroll set, especially if you're playing forward Vape Neuvillette together. So, all of this to say, I'm very excited for Mavuika for other reasons, but forward Vape Neuvillette and Xilonen is going to go pretty hard when 5.3 drops.
Alright, let the mountains veins boil! Into the wind. Clouds high. Birds.
Silence be sanctified.
So that's pretty much it. Look, in conclusion, Neuvillette is still one of the strongest DPSs in the game, especially by my estimation. And if you get him, he is going to really help with you doing various things that often require the strongest builds, like Spiral Abyss. So you're pretty much good to go in that regard. Highly reliable choice for both veterans and newbies. Of course, with Mavuika and Citlali on the horizon, you will need to prioritize based on who you want. And both characters are going to be very interesting because they're going to provide some pretty crazy potential for those team compositions. Now, I, for one, am probably not going for Citlali anytime soon, but I will be looking at Mavuika and Neuvillette because it's, again, going to be kind of insane. Let's not talk about Mavuika and Citlali in the spoilers and stuff in the comments, because there are going to be folks who didn't watch this part, so let's not worry about that. Let's not discuss these spoilers and leaks and all that jazz. We'll save that for when the inevitable, you know, top 10 teams that I'm going to be looking into with Mavuika video comes out when I get around to doing that. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe for more Genshin Impact action, and until next time, I will see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.